Chapter 1, Baby Joey. As I opened my eyes, it took a minute to figure out where I was. My head throbbed with a hangover, my mouth was sandpaper dry, and my eyes so blurry it seemed as if the motel room were filled with smoke. Slowly, I made out my 3-year-old curled up in his playpen at the side of my bed. Thank God he was okay. I lay very still, afraid I'd vomit if I moved, and watched as Billy began to stir, squirming awake and rolling over to notice me. His face lit in a joyful smile as he reached out his chubby arms and said, "Mama." I crawled out of bed and limped to him, scooping him into my arms. He attached himself to my neck, wrapping his legs around my waist and squeezing with all his might. The only human who loved me, the only real love I'd ever known. I managed to get Billy dressed. I was already dressed, having slept in yesterday's clothes, but I splashed cold water on my face and ran a comb through my long blonde knotted hair. We headed out in search of breakfast. The sun shone brightly off the parking lot blacktop. The birds were singing. The pool was littered with empty beer cans and a few random people passed out in deck chairs. We walked past them and toward the diner down the road where the nice man worked who sometimes slid us a plate of food without the manager noticing. This was our life in the Welfare Motel in Western Massachusetts. It wasn't great, but it was a giant leap from our last place, the homeless shelter in the next city over. I was a frightened 18-year-old when I had Billy, and once they placed him in my arms, I added amazement to the mix. Amazed that someone as damaged and empty as me could be entrusted with an infant and instantly love him so much. Becoming a mother wasn't in my playbook, but then again, living wasn't in my playbook either. I was existing. My relationship with Billy's father, Butch, was based on survival. When I was 16 and my parents divorced, 2 years after CPS came in and took my siblings away for a month, my mother and siblings scattered to Florida. She told me I could come with her or find a place to live. She didn't have to ask twice. 16 years in that chaos was more than enough. I'd stay up north and find a man to take care of me. Enter Butch, 10 years older than me and fresh out of the military. Butch was from one of the few black families in town. He was a responsible quality control inspector by the day, and by night he put up with my delinquent partying, at least at first. Now that we had use of an adult's house, my 16-year-old friends and I moved our outdoor keg parties indoors. At Butch's, in addition to booze, we had all the pot, coke, and acid we could want. Within a month, I was expelled from school. I was reckless and combative, and Butch took his parenting role seriously. He checked my grocery store receipts, the mileage I put on his car, and took away my blow dryer and makeup when I got too wild. We both believed he did this for my own good. I was on a fast-moving train headed for a brick wall. Within 2 years, I was pregnant. Once we had Billy, Butch was ready to settle down and build a family. But his control over my life began to feel too much like my childhood with my own parents. So, I used the only trick I knew. I ran. I called my father, now remarried, and asked if Billy and I could stay with him. But he said no. I had no one to turn to. I soon found out that the social service system was set up for triage, not long-term help. As I tried to navigate it alone, the mother in me was beginning to gain a little bit of clarity. Being responsible for this precious human was mind-blowing. One minute, terrified and hopeless, I would go on a massive binge that lasted days. Then, when the fog cleared, I'd experience moments of such overwhelming love and gratitude for my son that I would actually believe I had the capacity to someday be a good mom. We ended up in a shelter for women and children, a 3-story brick box of a building. I was grateful for the roof over our heads, but still afraid. Most of the shelter residents were Spanish-speaking Latinas. Only a few were white like me, and we were kept mostly segregated. I didn't judge anyone for their race, but I could immediately sense that many of the residents were not on board with my biracial child. We slept in a room on the top floor with several other mothers and children. It was noisy and stifling, with no air conditioning and in the dead of summer, almost unbearable. My only possession besides our clothing was a pink fan that Butch had bought for us. This was not the life he wanted for his son, but the law was on my side as his mother. Without going to court and spending lots of money, Butch knew he couldn't take Billy away from me. And though I wasn't great mom material, I did love my son with everything in me. It hurt to be sleeping in a shelter with no one in our corner. My dad was remarried a few towns over and had already turned his back on me. My mom and siblings were 1,000 miles away in Florida. I was left wondering why I was still alive. I kept Billy as close to me as possible, trusting no one. I made sure he slept in the same bed as me so no one could hurt him. Feeling unwanted and unaccepted was ingrained in me since birth. It was a part of my inner fiber, but it hurt to see my son now treated the same way by residents of the shelter. Nobody would engage with Billy or let their children play with him. I couldn't stand watching it. I had to get us out of here. Fortunately, we were able to get into the welfare hotel within a month. It felt like winning the lottery until I met the hookers, pimps, and fellow addicts who became our new neighbors. The hotel was like a strip mall. Each door opened up to a small business selling drugs, sex, alcohol, or all three, where bodies lay asleep or unconscious in a pile of lost souls. We kept to ourselves, and I navigated our surroundings carefully. Billy loved the pool, and we spent many hours playing in the water. We somehow learned to ignore the regulars who lay passed out or overdosed on the deck chairs during the day. When a handsome man showed up at the pool one day flashing a bright white smile, paying me compliments and paying gentle attention to Billy, it felt like my knight in shining armor had arrived. Carlos and I quickly became a couple. I was starving for both friendship and attention, and Carlos provided both. Carlos turned out to be a steadfast protector and provider in this rough environment, at least at first. He made sure everyone at the motel knew I was his and not to mess with us. He was generous with his money, alcohol, and drugs. He took us out to dinner at Burger King and even a few times at Ponderosa and bought us clothes. And he frequently took us with him on what he called work trips to New York City. I didn't ask what his work was. I didn't care. He made me feel like we both mattered to him, something I was starving for. On our trips into the city, Carlos liked to ride in the back and relax. We tucked Billy into his car seat and Carlos lay in the back dozing off next to him while I happily drove. Once we entered Queens, Carlos would drop Billy and I at a friend's house or a local park to hang out for a few hours while he worked. Then he'd pick us up and I'd take the wheel, driving us back to Massachusetts. One night, upon returning to the motel, I pulled up to our room and noticed what turned out to be a police lockbox on the door. "What's that?" I asked, and Carlos responded by yelling, "Get the hell out of here!" I screeched into a U-turn and took off out of the parking lot. Carlos directed me to one of his friends' houses, and when we arrived, several of his friends quickly surrounded the car and began to dismantle it as I scooped Billy from his car seat and held him several feet away. I watched in horror as they withdrew bags of cocaine from every door panel, under all the seats and within the dash. It all became clear in an instant. Carlos was using me as a drug mule. The cops were less likely to stop a car being driven by a woman, and my 3-year-old baby had been along for the ride. This would have been the moment to pack up and leave the motel and Carlos behind. But where would I go? Back to the stifling hot shelter where no one talked to us or interacted with Billy? Back to social services to see if they could find us a new shelter? I felt desperate, and adding to that feeling was a sneaking suspicion I might be pregnant. I had missed a few periods but let myself stay in denial about why that might be. Now I made my way to a pregnancy clinic and took a test. It was positive. I went back to the motel and lay on the bed. My mind was swirling. I could not handle another baby. I loved Billy with all my heart, but I was barely handling him. Obviously so, since I had just unknowingly put him smack in the middle of several drug runs. I had to somehow get my life together, and I couldn't bear the thought of failing 2 children. It actually seemed selfish of me to keep a second child when I hadn't yet learned how to care for my first. I decided I had to give this baby up for adoption to a loving, healthy family that could raise him well and leave me to focus on Billy. I waited a few days to bring the subject up with Carlos. We were having a calm night together, talking and watching TV in the motel room, so I cautiously approached the subject. I told him I was pregnant and that I couldn't raise a second child. Billy needed me, and I was already failing. I had to place this baby up for adoption. I had thought it through and made up my mind. "Hell no," Carlos yelled. "You are not going to give my baby away." He was adamant that he would not allow an adoption. Rather, he would take the baby to Puerto Rico where his mother would raise it. He kept saying he forbade me to give away his baby. If I dared try to place this child up for adoption, I would pay. I had no idea what lengths a macho Puerto Rican man would go to make good on a threat like that. I did not intend to stick around to find out. I did what I did best. I started to plan my escape. Back in 1988, when you wanted to find out any type of information, you went to the yellow pages at the back of the thick local phone book and looked up your topic alphabetically. I turned to adoption, read through the advertisements of local agencies, and started making phone calls. Calling from the motel was tricky because I had to leave a message with the room number and then wait for a callback, never knowing if Carlos would answer the phone. Butch stepped in to help, letting me make calls from his phone and taking callback messages for me. Then one day I got a call at the motel from one of my aunts, who told me my dad was dying from an aggressive form of lymphoma. By the time I made it to the hospital to see him, he was in a coma. I held his hand and told him I loved him and that I was going to have a baby and name him Joseph, after him. I would find a good family to adopt Joseph. My father didn't open his eyes, but weakly squeezed my hand, and I held on to that gesture as a sign of love, despite everything he had done to me and to my siblings. It would be years before I could look clearly at his abuse. All I wanted in that moment was to feel I belonged to someone. I mattered. I was not disposable, and I could do something good in this world. Billy would never get to know his grandfather, and I would never see my dad again. It was amazing how adoption agencies told me up front how much money they would pay me. What the hell? I wasn't trying to sell a puppy. I was looking for a good mom and dad for a baby who deserved much better than me. Finally, after several weeks of calls, I found an agency not too far from us. Now all I needed to do was hide from Carlos. The agency assigned me a social worker, Nancy, who was the first person in my life who made me feel as if I mattered. Through her own church, Nancy found a young family willing to take us in while I waited out the pregnancy. Mark and Holly were in their early 30s with 2 little girls, aged 2 and 4, and they lived a life I had only heard of in stories or maybe movies. They were very religious and extremely intentional in all they did and said, but they never preached. They had a beautiful ranch home in a gorgeous neighborhood, and they gave us their finished basement with its own lovely bedroom and bathroom. I couldn't believe how peaceful it felt to be safe in the home of dependable, caring people, a feeling I had never known in my life. Holly and I shopped together, and I used my food stamps to get breakfast and lunch items for Billy and me, and to contribute to the family dinners we had each night around their kitchen table. Holly and Mark asked gentle questions and listened intently. It was almost shocking, as if I had landed on another planet. When Holly offered me dessert or suggested she could watch Billy as I ran an errand, I wanted to scream, "No, run! Get away from me before I ruin your whole life!" I was afraid that if God knew I was there, the house might burn down. Living with them brought out my gratitude as well as a deep well of shame. I was lower than low, a terrible mom and a bad person. I hated myself so desperately. Billy and I spent our days in our room watching TV, taking naps, and eating healthy foods. Nancy encouraged me to get my GED and gave me a prep book to study. Holly drove me to the test and babysat Billy, and thanks to those two women, I now had a high school diploma. Nancy also helped me explain to Billy, in an age-appropriate way, that Mommy was going to have a baby, and this new baby was going to live with a new Mommy and Daddy. We made sure to reassure Billy that he wasn't going away with the new baby. He would stay right here with me. Sometimes I wonder if that landed more as a threat than a promise. Did Billy wish he could go away too? Would he ultimately look at his baby sibling as the lucky one that got away? But Nancy's gentle guidance was helping those harsh thoughts in my mind slowly begin to get quieter. Her love and support began to convince me that maybe I wasn't garbage after all. It was important to me that I chose Joseph's new family. I wanted non-identifying information and no pictures exchanged. I did not want his family to look over their shoulders any more than I wanted to look over mine. It was important to me that Joseph be told he was adopted, but I knew I could not control that. It was also important that he be raised believing in a higher power. Those were the only two things I wanted for him. I had 5 family biographies to read. When I got to this one particular family, I immediately knew they were the ones. They had already adopted 2 children who were siblings. The father was an engineer and the mom a nurse, and they had a large extended family nearby. That's all I knew about them, but I didn't need any more information. In my gut, I knew this was the right family for my baby. I had been going back and forth for prenatal counseling to the hospital where I would give birth, and that's where I met my second amazing social worker. Her name was Paula, and she quickly became one of the most important people in my life. We decided that given the threats Carlos had made, it was best I use an alias for my delivery. We set up security measures for my safety and Joseph's. A description of his father was given to the hospital, and everyone was made aware that he would not be allowed near me or the baby. For my alias, I chose Sheila White. Sheila was the name the nuns gave me in the orphanage for my first 5 months of life. I made it clear to Paula and my doctor that I wanted to spend the entire first 3 days in the hospital with Joseph until the relinquishment period was up and I signed the adoption papers. He was not going to be abandoned into the arms of a new nurse every shift. He was going to bond like newborn babies need, and it was going to be with me. I was also going to nurse him to give him as much of a healthy start and bonding comfort as I could. My baby was not going to lie in a plastic box in the nursery and wait for affection and attention. For 3 days, I was going to love him completely and then pass him into the arms of his new mom, who I innately knew would love him just as much. Although this was not the typical birth mom request, I was adamant. Finally, the day came. I was scheduled to be induced. Billy was with his father, and Holly dropped me off at the hospital. I checked myself in, knowing I would once again be alone when I checked myself out. It felt surreal that I was about to set in motion decisions that could never be undone. I had a tiny human growing inside me, and I was about to set him free. As I settled into the delivery room, my mom called from Florida. She asked how I was and then said, "Do you really want to go through with giving away your child?" "Yes," I responded, wishing I had her unconditional support instead of the doubt and criticism I heard in her voice. I was going to give away my child to another woman who wanted to be a mother but couldn't have a child of her own. The same thing someone had done for my mom 19 years ago. Paula stopped by to check on me before she left for the day, promising to return the next morning to meet Joseph. Only a few days prior, Carlos had shown up at the hospital looking for me. Paula had been alerted by security that he was there asking for me, She told him I had moved to Florida. I hoped and prayed that tactic had worked and that he didn't come back looking for me. It was a difficult labor. The nurses held my hand and said, "You can do it. And you're doing great. And you're going to be okay." They were my lifeline, and I had been waiting all my life to hear words like that. Why had it taken so long in such a difficult situation? Were they true? Was I doing good? Was I going to be okay? After 18 hours, Joseph was born, and he was absolutely perfect. I had been honest about my drug and alcohol use during the first trimester. When the pediatrician examined him, he looked at me and said, "By the grace of God, he is perfectly healthy." I cried tears of gratitude. Joey, which became his immediate nickname, took my breath away. He had a full head of dark hair, a sweet round face, and such a calm demeanor. I could not stop looking at him. Butch brought Billy to visit that first night, and his face lit up with wide-eyed wonder at his little brother. A look seared into my mind forever. "Mom," he exclaimed with all the innocence of a 3-year-old, "it's my brother Joey." He wriggled his little body up onto my bed and held out his arms. I placed his brother in his arms and he beamed. My heart swelled and shattered at the same time. Watching his excitement and seeing his pride, I knew that I was going to be ripping this away from him. This decision was about to completely change his world. How would he ever trust me again? How would he ever feel stable and secure, wondering if he was next? How would he feel knowing his potential playmate and best friend was going to a new mommy and daddy? Was he not good enough to play with? Would he grow up feeling less than the amazing little boy he was? I was terrified for him and had no idea how to handle these questions. I asked Billy how he felt. Was he sad? He smiled up at me with his big brown eyes and confidently said, "I will see him in my heart." I was rendered speechless at his childlike wisdom, a conclusion filled with love and acceptance. Maybe this would work out after all. Because of the security threat, I was placed in the regular ward of the hospital while Joey stayed in the maternity ward. When I wanted to visit him or nurse, which was every waking moment, a security guard escorted me by wheelchair. After the first day, I realized I was at the convenience of the guard and decided I was not going to wait for him to show up. I began to wheel myself to the maternity ward to see Joey, and no one tried to stop me. I knew I was not the typical birth mom and that nursing especially was uncommon in this situation. What I didn't know was why this made people uncomfortable. Every time I asked for my baby, they looked at me funny and made me feel like I didn't deserve him. I already felt this way, so it didn't take much. But I also couldn't understand why they weren't supporting the act of nursing a newborn child for a few days. There was nowhere for me to sit, so I had to nurse him in the waiting room. The tears I cried all over his body were shared with anyone who also happened to be in the waiting room. One day in the waiting room, I met a mom who had just given birth to her 5th child. When she asked about Joey, and I told her he was going to a new family, she looked at me with a mix of admiration and freakish wonder. She told me she was having a hard time taking care of the 4 children she already had, and she had no idea how she was going to care for a 5th. She wished she could do what I was doing, but was unable to. Her words gave me a sense of hope and strength. There is no doubt in my mind that we were 2 mothers who were meant to meet in that waiting room and share our stories. Although I was convicted in my decision, I also had moments of doubt. I closed my eyes and imagined a playground and my 2 sons playing together, laughing and having fun. I imagined pushing a double stroller with both kids in it and even how I could arrange their bedrooms. Then I would remind myself there was no playground. I had no stroller, and even worse, I had no home. We were still homeless. It was not fair to either Billy or Joey to fantasize about how I wanted to feel. It was about them, and right now I had to get myself solid and provide for myself and Billy. Joey was going to have a fresh start and a solid home. He was blessed. I knew in my heart I had chosen the best home for him. I knew his parents loved him already before even meeting him. I knew there was a higher power that would take care of us all, and this was the best plan. In the hospital was a group of women who made clothes for babies who otherwise would not have any. They came in and let me pick out a few outfits for Joey. Beautiful hand-knit outfits, bonnets and blankets, white trimmed in blue. My heart was going to burst with gratitude. I didn't have the money to buy him anything, so being able to choose his clothes meant so much to me. He looked so cute in his gorgeous new clothes. I couldn't thank those women enough. The third morning came, and it was time for me to sign the adoption papers and say goodbye. I held his little body close to me, and over I told him how much I loved him and that he mattered so much. I wished him all the blessings life had to offer and handed him over to the nurse on duty. My heart was filled with a combination of despair and sadness, hope and faith in my decision, and a great sense of determination to make a wonderful life for Billy. The moment seared into my mind forever. I watched the nurse walk out of the room as tears streamed down my face. But I could do this. Be well, my Joey. I love you. They handed me a pen, and I signed my name on the relinquishment papers. I obviously couldn't ask Carlos to sign them, and without a father's name, they would have placed Joey in foster care for months while they made a public announcement in the newspaper for paternity. Nope, that was not going to happen to my child on my watch. Once again, Butch stepped in to help and signed as Joey's father on the relinquishment papers. I felt zero responsibility to Carlos, the man who'd knowingly taken my toddler with us on drug runs to New York. He didn't get a say in my decision. There was zero chance I was going to let my baby end up in Puerto Rico with a family that would only take him out of obligation. Logic might suggest that I would have more confidence in giving Joey to his paternal grandparents than an adoptive family, but I felt just the opposite. I couldn't explain it. I just knew in my heart and gut that he didn't belong in Puerto Rico and that the adoptive family was going to take good care of him. I was able to stay for a couple more days with the family that so graciously opened their home up to Billy and me, but then it was time to go. We packed our one plastic bag of clothing and headed to our next stop, a new welfare motel. This one was a slight improvement from the last. There were no hookers or addicts passed out around the pool. I was determined to make a life. Although I had suffered a great loss by giving Joey up for adoption, I also gained a strange element of self-worth. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had been strong for someone else. Maybe I wasn't garbage. Maybe I did matter, and damn it, Billy deserved the best of me. I pounded the pavement. Within a couple of weeks, I had a job at a local manufacturing plant working in their cafeteria. One of my best friends from high school, JP, believed in me. I wasn't sure why, as he'd seen the worst of me many times. He offered for me to rent his couch for $25 a week. I decided this was my chance to start building a life for me and my son. I left Billy with his dad, slept on JP's couch, and immediately went and got a second job as well at a local banquet hall. I didn't have a car, so I hitchhiked to each job. I woke each day at 3 a.m. to make sure I had enough time to land a ride to the manufacturing plant, then ended my nights at 11 p.m. when a coworker from the catering hall drove me home. Very soon, I met a guy who owned a small used car lot, and he agreed to sell me a car for $50 a week, cash. JP eventually rented me my own bedroom, and I finally began to feel like a real responsible adult. Billy visited as often as I could have him when I wasn't working. Shortly after I started at the banquet hall, the owner, Linda, approached me one day and commented that I would make a great limo driver. She worked with a local company who needed drivers for special events. What? Didn't she know who I was? I had never even seen a limo up close before. For whatever reason, she saw something in me that I didn't. I went for an interview and got the job. Little did I know it at the time, but driving a limo would become one of the best experiences of my life. I was much better at taking care of people than I thought. I promptly quit the cafeteria job where my boss was giving me the worst tasks because I said no when he asked me out. There I was, a single mom of a now 4-year-old boy, past drug addict and current broke-ass chick driving a limo. I worked as many hours as I could between the banquet hall and limo. It didn't take long to save up enough money to rent our very own apartment, a ground floor, 1-bedroom in a long complex. The day I got the keys to that apartment is burned in my memory. To date, it was the biggest accomplishment of my life. The look of excitement and pride on Billy's face took my breath away. "Our own house!" he exclaimed. I was never garbage to Billy. To him, I had always mattered. I was starting to feel like I might just have a chance of mattering to myself as well. We had 0 possessions besides our clothes and toiletries, but we were blessed with friends donating a couch, a television, sheets for curtains. My boss even donated a few dishes from the banquet hall. Life was starting to look up. As I look back on how we'd gotten to this point, with help from Nancy, the family who took me in while pregnant, Paula, the maternity nurses, the knitting ladies, JP and Linda, that's when I began to notice the angels all around me.